This is the part where I'm supposed to engage in some idle chit-chat with Brad, but seeing as he's not here, I can't really do that. I know he's on the government roads on his way to get to his computer to join me on the show. So with that, let us just start the show. Annoying Peasant Radio Show, episode whatever number. I don't even know why people keep track of the numbers. Here we go.
And now for something completely different.
Humans do have an amazing capacity for believing what they choose.
I think before we go around killing people, we had better make damn sure of our evidence.
They lied to you. It's time to learn the truth.
You can't handle the truth!
From what was once an inarticulate mass of lifeless tissues, may I now present a cultured, sophisticated man about town.
Hey, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us on the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. Here's the weird deal. I'm all alone tonight. Well, maybe just for starters. We're hoping that Brad will be able to call in here in a little bit, and we'll actually be able to engage in a bit of chit-chat. So let me, I guess, formally start the show until Brad joins us. How's that? Welcome to this episode of the Annoying Peasant Radio Show, just so you know that you're in the right place if that's where you intended to be. My name is Tom, and tonight's episode is entitled Anne Frank and Snowden. How can those two names be in the same sentence? Part 1. I got a feeling there's going to be a number of parts to this because it's going to take a little bit to get through all this material tonight. For anyone new, I was just going to explain, people, you can join us in the chat room, I guess. Yeah, Tanya says it's me and the crickets. If anybody's listening on, well, actually, I don't know all the places, but at least at Spreaker.com, if you were there, there's a little, dialogue box, I call it, and it's actually not a box. It's a dialogue image. If you click on that, you'll be in the chat room, and Tanya is there all alone. So I guess I'm partly going to have my conversation with Tanya tonight. Anyway, so that's available, chat room, if anyone's listening live, of course. The chat room's not available when you're listening to the show archived. Anyway, Anne Frank and Snowden. Okay, how can those two names, what's the link? That's what we're going to get to here in this show. Before we get to that, though, what I want to do is get to kind of the big picture on this show. For anyone new listening, or even people who have listened on multiple occasions, I like to change this up a little bit so they kind of get, the 30,000-foot view of what we're trying to do on this show. And, most hold that we put forth a radical political philosophy, a libertarian legal theory, if you will. All I can say is consistent with Dr. Walter Block, one of my many heroes, intellectually, of course. This theory of justice, in effect, asks one question. It is, when is the use of force justified, if ever? And the libertarian theory of justice answers in only defense of person or property. Now think of that, right? I commented on another show one time about there's two types of force, aggressive force, or the initiation of violence, and defensive force, which obviously is used in defense after someone has initiated violence against you. And the person running the show happened to be a gal. She says, I don't understand. There's no difference. Force is force. I think there is a giant difference. Let me explain a little bit. But to properly understand defensive force, we must distinguish it from the initiation of force. Again, the two types of force I previously mentioned. Force is initiated when it is used against an innocent. And by the way, an innocent is a person is defined as one who has not initiated violence against you, right? So a person who is not initiating violence against you, if you were to use force against them, that would be, in effect, the initiation of force or the initiation of violence or aggressive force, if you will. So put it another way, an innocent is one who has not violated your or another's property right, right? That requires a number of things, like what are property rights? What are you talking about? And again, we could do entire shows on that topic, and I want to get through this. And again, this is intended to just give you a 30,000-foot view of what's going on. So if you want to determine if a violation of property rights has occurred, whether one has initiated force or not, right, like we just talked about, property rights must be determined, right, or defined. Properly revealed, and I choose my words carefully here, revealed, property rights constitute all of man's rights. All of them. Check it out. All of them. You've heard of other rights. I understand that. But stay with us here. And they are also rooted in self-ownership. Property rights rooted in self-ownership are the proper origin, as a denial of self-ownership catches one in a performative contradiction. And we've done shows about this before. But just think about it for a moment. If I say you're a self-owner and you say, no, I'm not, you are expressing the ownership of yourself by denying it, right? You're caught in a performative contradiction. In effect, you can't logically deny it. That's the point. The libertarian legal theory is therefore the only legal theory rooted in man's nature and therefore inescapable, right? You cannot deny it logically. Self-ownership is therefore they call axiomatic. There are many consequences to this theory of justice. Tonight we will consider a number of these consequences, and we got a fantastic feature story coming up, so hold tight, everybody. Man, no doubt, has obligations other than legal obligations, and I'm trying to get people to understand there's two types of obligations. There's legal obligations and moral obligations, right? And of these moral obligations, each man shall rightly determine as to how far he can or will perform them, right? Each man, individually, you determine them. So I'm going to quote Lysander Spooner, one of my intellectual heroes. But of his legal duty, this is the quote from Spooner, but of his legal duty, that is, of his duty to live honestly towards his fellow men not only may judge, but for their own protection must judge. And if need be, they may rightfully compel him to perform it. Right? They may do this acting singly or in concert. They may do it on the instant as the necessity rises or deliberately and systematically. So we must be careful in our discussion to distinguish between man's legal duty and his moral duty. Those are two different items. Right? Typically on this show, we speak of legal duties, of what justice requires of you. I'm going to get a little more specific towards what we're going to be talking about tonight, and let me just say I got just a couple sentences to get through here, and we're going to move on to a slightly different topic before we get into our feature story. Many confuse justice with laws, regulations, ordinances, rules, etc. Now, hang on a second. Let me say that again. Think about that. It sounds crazy what I just said. Many confuse justice with laws, regulations, ordinance, rules, etc. Most people go, well, they're the one and the same. I argue they are, in fact, not. Laws, regulations, ordinances, blah, 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 those things are essentially constructs of man and are not necessarily legitimate. I would argue, of course, whenever they violate property rights, as we talked about, they're not legitimate. Many support the law, I have in quotes, as a matter of religious conviction, civic duty, or some other embedded requirement, right? To carte blanche support the state is to offer support to the agents of the state and to whatever activities to which the state engages, right? Both good things and bad things that the state may do. Now, some of you might argue, well, the state it's not possible for them to do anything bad. I would argue not only is it possible, it's happened on numerous occasions. But does this not, if it's the case that the state can actually do bad things, and I happen to be on that side, does this not place you in a moral quandary? right? If you feel this civic duty, this religious conviction, whatever, there's some requirement to support the state, and you feel it's moral to do so. What if the state does something immoral? Can you morally support a state that requires or does something that's immoral? I think tonight's feature story will bring some of this out in context. So please stay with us for that upcoming, hopefully it'll be called a discussion when Brad is able to join us. By the way, I just wanted to make a quick aside here. A system of justice is a moot point in the event you are the only person, quote unquote, around. You know, the typical example is Crusoe on a deserted island, right? Everything else will be considered part of the environment. I don't know, the trees, the sand, the water, an ape, and I don't know, a black panther. I don't know what's all on that island, right? Those are essentially parts, not essentially, they are the environment. So justice only applies when others who have the ability to reason, which I would argue separates man from animals or rocks or anything else, right? The ability to reason, so justice only applies when others who have the ability to reason or, other self-owners are in proximity, right? Because that causes the potential for conflicts to arise. And I would argue the assignment of property rights rooted in self-ownership establishes a mean to avoid those conflicts. So, all right. This is where I have Brad usually do the quotes of the day. So I'm doing the quotes of the day. All right, and I got a little one for you. I just thought this was a little apropos for tonight's feature story. You got to tell me, who is this quote from? And I guess Tanya's the only one in the chat at the moment, so she has first shot at it. You're not going to get this, Tanya, by the way. Here's the quote. There are times when we must all endure adjustment to the Constitution in the name of security. All right, Tanya, I'm going to the chat room. See, you're probably doing something else anyway. Yeah, nobody knows who that is. Well, actually, I shouldn't say nobody. Obviously, somebody knows who that is. Again, there are times when we must all endure adjustment to the Constitution in the name of security. And I'm going to tell you who it is, and some of you, again, who are not familiar are still not going to know when I say the name. Senator Palpatine. Hey, did anybody watch Star Wars? Right? I just want to point out how ridiculous that statement is, because a lot of people think, well, that's ridiculous if I say Senator Palpatine. But beforehand, I don't know what percentage of people were thinking Senator Palpatine from Star Wars, right? But think about it now in the context of knowing that. You go, well, that's absurd, right? Well, think about that. There are times when we must all endure adjustment to the Constitution in the name of security. I remember George Bush, not H.W., just George Bush saying something like, I've abandoned free market principles in order to save the free market. By the way, I'm an equal opportunity basher here on this show, but that's another whole deal. I have a second one here that I also think is apropos to tonight's feature story. Any man who subordinates his will to that of the state surrenders his liberty and thus becomes a slave. So think about that a little bit. When people feel they have this, embedded requirement, whether it be civic duty or religious conviction, or I don't even know all the possibilities there, right? However you want to describe it, that you got to support the state. And many people, well, that's what makes this country great. You don't understand that, Tom. Well, there's a lot of things apparently I don't understand, or at least I've been accused of not understanding. Of course, I would argue differently. But think about that. Any man who subordinates his will to that of the state surrenders his liberty and thus becomes a slave. Don't do this blindly. By the way, whose quote is that? Mohandas Gandhi. So, okay, they're not just coming for me here, folks. I'm not smart enough to come up with them. I'm just barely smart enough to copy them down and read them to you. Anyway, some announcements we want to do. I do want to thank Tim, the Texas Father of Seven, for joining us last week. We greatly appreciate his contribution, as always, to the show. And he did, of course, last week another excellent job. I know he's otherwise busy tonight, so he can't be with us, but he did a fantastic job, and we always appreciate that. Well, of course, we always love the contributions of the Northwoods mom as well. So, Tanya, if you're listening, again, we always appreciate that. We want to have Cassie on, too, if Cassie's listening. Long story there. Another announcement, AgoraFest 2015 at the Villa Maria Conference Center and Retreat. That'll be September 24th to the 27th. We've had Nick Ludwig on talking about it briefly. Just save the date at this moment. Again, September 24 to 27. We look forward to being there. We have a couple of ideas for us to be there. And there's quite a variety there. And I know we'll have Nick or at least someone else from AgoraFest 2015 on again at least once before it comes on. We'll probably have someone on like a week or two before it starts just to give you the latest information. I would encourage everyone to watch and participate on the Facebook page, obviously facebook.com/annoyingpeasantradio for a variety of postings. Again, thanks to Tanya, Tim, and Cassie for their efforts. You guys keep some cool stuff going on there, and I definitely appreciate it. Our next live show will be on Tuesday evening, June 16th at 7 Central, so obviously 1 week from today, and we will be continuing with part 2 of tonight's show topic. And I'm not entirely sure how many parts this is going to be, but we shall see, as they say. Before I get going with tonight's feature story, I want to do a follow-up segment on the TSA. I don't know if you hadn't caught last week's show, please do so. Tim did an awesome job, obviously. But we covered a number of different topics. We were kind of all over the place, which was kind of interesting and fun, I guess. Some people liked it. But I wanted to concentrate, at least on a bit of a follow-up, on the TSA, I don't know what you call it. I don't even know what, I'm speechless, I guess, which is not good for radio, by the way. But at TSA, the story that shows that they failed like 67 of 70 items in their audits, right? Which equates essentially to a 95% failure ratio. And again, I know people say, you got to have the TSA, we got to have security. Well, wait a minute. If they fail 95% of the time, how much security are they actually providing? Right? And some people will say, well, 5% is better than nothing, right? I don't know if I could argue with there. Sure, 5% is better than nothing, but I don't think that's the question. If the TSA went away, if I could wave my magic wand, don't you think that the airlines have an incentive to keep their operations safe? Now, nobody's perfect. I'm not arguing that. But could you jump maybe to the conclusion that the TSA is very far from perfect? Almost to the point of they aren't doing anything other than, right, violating people's rights, slowing down the whole process, all those things, right? I'm saying, well, this audit shows they provide no security. So wait, also let's look back at what's the level of threat then against the airlines? And again, I'm not suggesting that every airline go with no security. I'm suggesting that they provide their own security commensurate with what they believe the threat to be, right? And as a consumer, I'm advocating that you determine for yourself what level of safety is required by you, right? For all I know, a new airline could come in and say, no safety airlines. We just take cash for every ticket and away you go, right? If nobody buys that ticket, I assume it would be at a reduced fee because they wouldn't be employing security people. Their costs would be lower, right? Their competitive advantage would be theoretically that they could charge less. But if society, by and large, the marketplace, I like that word better, by the way, than society, they could determine that themselves if they want to take that risk for the reduced cost. Right? I don't understand what's wrong with that. And I know I have my detractors. I'm not arguing that. But why can't the marketplace decide? And I know many people, well, the marketplace doesn't know what it's doing. I would argue people they should be able to make their own decisions. They should bear the consequences of good ones. In other words, reap the benefits of good ones. And they should also have to take care of the responsibility of making poor decisions, right? Whether it costs them money or if they go no security airlines and something does happen, maybe they pay with injury or potentially with their life. But who am I to decide what level of security someone else needs? I think each individual needs to make that. Again, talking about, the moral requirements that each person has that I quoted earlier from Lysander Spooner, blah, blah, blah. I can't put what I believe is right on someone else. All I can do is enforce your legal requirements or your legal obligations. Anyway, I'm talking specifically about James Bovard in a USA Today op-ed that he wrote. I think it was on June the 5th, if I remember. If I can go back up here and try to find it for you people, if you want to go. Yes, June 5th in USA Today. I know it was in USA Today online. I assume it was also in print, but that I do not know for certain. But okay, so Bovard makes a number of statements characterizing the TSA. Check it out. He says TSA continues blindly blundering and pointlessly abusing Americans' rights and privacy. Again, in light of their 95% failure rate, there's merit to that characterization, right? Second one is, shortly after TSA was created in late 2001, one of its early mottos was dominate, intimidate, control. I'm taking this out of the article. I did not independently verify any of this. From the start, the TSA put more focus on browbeating hapless travelers than intelligently focusing on actual aviation hazards, right? And I've argued before on this show that the nature of the state is failure is success and success is failure. And by that I mean every time they fail, it's a good thing for them. Why? Because they say, hey, we didn't have the resources. We need more resources. They just jack up fees. They jack up your taxes, right? Because it's a monopoly. Where else are you going to go? You have no alternatives. And success is failure. If they get it, how are they going to increase their budget? How are those guys going to increase their standing, their authority? How are they going to get better titles and positions if their organization isn't growing, right? Think about that. When you're in a monopoly situation, you create a lot of weird situations. And again, for you, I don't know, Republicans who focus on big business or business has to handle. Usually, you guys are, and both sides, I guess I would argue, are, and when I say, hey, how do you guys favor a monopoly in the free market? And usually the answer is basically not so much. Then why do you favor it for what I would argue is some of the most important functions in society, being the courts, police, in this case, the TSA, right, for your security at the airport, which I'd argue, what's the difference between security at the airport and security in general? You can have your own security. Lot to explain there. No, people are just going, oh my goodness, you can't do that. I think you're missing the, in a sense, how would it work is asking the wrong question, and I've addressed that a couple times on other shows. So we'll set that aside because we want to move along, get to the feature. But Bovard lists a number of reported abuses perpetrated by the TSA, either in policy or TSA agents who had an apparent lack of oversight. When I talk about there was this basically system-wide theft scandal years back. There was a number of things. Read the article if you want to know everything that Bovard has to say. But I'm going to quote here for a little bit. He says, in 2010, TSA expedited deploying of whole body scanners. Do you remember that? That captured nude images of travelers. The Electronic Privacy Information Center labeled the scanners, quote, one of the most sweeping, most invasive, and most unaccountable suspicionless searches of American travelers in history. Travelers who objected to the see-all scanners were often intentionally brutalized with enhanced pat-downs to teach them a lesson. USA Today reported that the new searches require screeners to touch passengers' breasts and genitals. TSA has also been caught repeatedly lying about the scanner's health perils. A PBS ProPublica report revealed that one type of widely used scanner, which was discontinued in 2013, by the way, could cause 6 to 100 cancer cases per year among travelers. The fact that the TSA agents failed 95% of the recent undercover tests proves that the whole body scanners are far less reliable than the agency claimed, right? I remember when this was happening, when they were installing these things. This was just going to, hey, it's going to speed up the lines. Lines are a thing of the past. We're going to zip you through, and they're far more reliable than what they had been doing previously. And by the way, they did cost a couple bucks, if I remember correctly. I guess nobody seems to really worry about that. No big deal. We just whine that the price of a ticket is high, but we don't realize that the chunk that are taxes that go to security and other such measures, landing fees, all that stuff, which again, I'm not saying an airline should pay nothing to land at an airport, but I'm saying it's a monopoly. Where else are they going to go? You likely have higher fees than otherwise would be. So anyway, the fact that TSA agents failed 95% of the recent undercover tests proves that the whole body scanners are far less reliable than the agency claimed. I think that's really important here. Basically, the TSA is not providing security. In its early days, TSA promised no weapons, no waiting. Again, I'm still quoting from his article. These are his words, by and large. I guess I did a few things out of quote, but here's another quote. The Department of Homeland Security admitted in 2011 congressional testimony that the large majority of travelers pose no security risks. And again, these are my words here. Yet they do seem to check everyone. But they themselves say the large majority. Well, why can't they figure out who might? Right? Wouldn't you think that would be a better allocation of resources? TSA cannot admit this self-evident truth without also conceding that it is pointlessly abusing and delaying millions of travelers every day. What's the cost of that, by the way? Is there a cost associated with it? I thought time was money. Instead, TSA continues a security theater routine that is far more effective at subjugating Americans than protecting them. Think about it. If they're really not providing protection, what in fact are they doing to the American traveler? Again, another quote. TSA chieftains have perpetually promised to reform their agency, but the scandals continue. Federalizing airport security was a knee-jerk reflex after 9/11. Like the Patriot Act, it presumed that vesting unchecked sweeping power in government agents would be a magic bullet to vanquish all threats. But after more than a dozen years of, I think it's just pratfalls, but I don't know, maybe it's pitfalls. Maybe I don't understand that word properly. It is time to admit that TSA, after groping millions of Americans, has no excuse for groping millions more. So here's my questions. Why do people continue to put up with the TSA? And studies, which again govern decision-making for most, not me, but for most, are quite conclusive. The TSA is not responsible for the lack of attacks on civilian air travel. Right? If they're not providing security, how can they get credit because there's been no attacks? Right? Think about that. TSA procedures are a violation of your property rights, and that's really the argument for me. They are also, of course, costly. They are nearly totally ineffective at achieving their goals. These are my words. I'm outside the article now. It is hard to imagine any private security agency doing a less effective job. Of course, it would likely be at a much lower cost. Travel would no doubt be less costly than otherwise would. The TSA, my commentary here should be eliminated. So ask yourself, are you comfortable with the TSA actions? Are you comfortable with its effectiveness? Do you support its effectiveness? I encourage you to analyze the stated intentions, policies, actions, and activities of the TSA through the lens of property rights. Of course, reach your own conclusions. We encourage you, as always, to think. So I'm going to move along after this. Normally we do some news. A, Brad's not here, and B, I want to get to our feature story here. So I'm going to continue to move along. And before I do that, I want to remind you that you are listening to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. And we want to, of course, thank you very kindly for joining us. And now let's move on to the feature story. So tonight's feature story, is centered around, oh boy, just went down my docket a little too far. Okay, an article entitled, "You're a Criminal in a Mass Surveillance World. How Not to Get Caught," by David Montgomery. And I believe it was authored, or at least it was published May 31st of this year, 2015, of course. But I want to give you a little background and some introductory material before we really get going in it. So hopefully by the time we get going in the feature story, Brad will be available, but you never know. Okay, so I've had a number of interesting conversations since the last show and the last week, but here we go. So when asking others if they would comply, here's maybe the central idea for me in this whole article and our discussion here. When asking others if they would comply with a law they determined was immoral, right? And that's upon me advocating what I would argue is the moral position. Many times I have been scolded that we are a nation of laws, not men. But here's really the central question for the evening, and I'll try to remind us of that as we go along. Is it in fact moral to support laws that you actually may believe are immoral, right? And I'm saying you're supporting the laws by supporting the state, saying, yes, I wholly support the government. I mean, it's my civic duty from religious beliefs, whatever. I believe you need to support the state. You need to support the government. So if they do some immoral things, where are you there? Is there a quandary? I think for some people, I don't know, maybe they'd argue there isn't. I think there clearly is, but I'm here to get you to think about it. You know, in this segment, we're going to take a look at law, criminality, and mass surveillance. Before we get to this feature story, I want to tell you quickly about, there's a book entitled 3 Felonies a Day, How the Feds Target the Innocent. And there's a synopsis of this book, and here we go. I'm just going to quote from it so to get you a little backdrop. The average professional in this country wakes up in the morning, goes to work, comes home, eats dinner, and then goes to sleep, unaware that he or she has likely committed several federal crimes that day. Think about that. Why? The answer lies in the very nature of modern federal criminal laws, which have exploded in number but also become impossibly broad and vague. No social class or profession is safe from this troubling form of social control by the executive branch, and nothing less than the integrity of our constitutional democracy hangs in the balance. That's from the book, 3 Felonies a Day, How the Feds Target the Innocent. I can't remember the two professors in there. I believe one of them was actually Alan Dershowitz, if I remember correctly. Somebody could check that. And part of the story tonight is going to be about Anne Frank. And I've run across a few people that were not familiar with Anne Frank. So I got to do a little bit of background there too. And then we're really going to get to it. Some background, of course, on Anne Frank. The Frank family moved from Germany to Amsterdam in 1933. The year the Nazis, I think this is from Wikipedia, by the way. The year the Nazis gained control over Germany. By May 1940, they were trapped in Amsterdam by the German occupation of the Netherlands. As persecutions of the Jewish population increased in July 1942, the family went into hiding in some concealed rooms behind a bookcase in the building where Anne's father worked. We're going to revisit this some because it goes on in the article a little bit too. But after 2 years, the group was betrayed and transported to concentration camps. Listen to that again. After 2 years, the group was betrayed and transported to concentration camps. Anne Frank and her sister, Margit Frank, were eventually transferred to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp where they died, probably of typhus, according to Wikipedia, in February or March of 1945. Again, I apologize to anyone who's very familiar with this information. Obviously, they already are well aware of. Otto Frank, the only survivor of the family, returned to Amsterdam after the war to find that Anne's diary had been saved by one of the helpers. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this right. Miep Gies. If, Tanya, you happen to know if I'm mispronouncing that, please let me know. And his efforts led to its publication in 1947. It has been translated into many languages. It was translated from its original Dutch version and first published in English in 1952 as The Diary of a Young Girl. I swear I knew it as The Diary of Anne Frank, but obviously my memory is not one of my better attributes at this point. The diary, which is given to Anne on her 13th birthday, chronicles her life from 12 June 1942 until August 1st, 1944. So, all right, let's get to this article that we're going to be discussing. And one of the early sections, I think is very important, is entitled, What Makes a Criminal? And I think I have this right from the article. Merriam-Webster defines crime, think about this, as activity that is against the law. Right? I think most people think that's quite obvious, right? But I want to again think, crime is activity that is against the law. Law is defined as a set of rules made by the government. I think most people are kind of on board there. But think about this. What does that mean? That a criminal is someone who breaks government rules, right? If the government makes up the rules, and the law is those rules, and a crime is you doing something that is against the law, it's a criminal is someone who breaks the government's rules, right? The law as a whole is an ever-expanding collection of rules that politicians, we call them lawmakers in a lot of cases, decree and occasionally repeal. But laws are as moral as... Oh, here's Brad coming in, so I'm gonna add him to the show. Please hang on here a second. Hey, hopefully you can hear me, Brad. Are you there?
What do you know, Tom?
Hey, not much. You know that. Am I getting me through your speaker? All right, I think it's gone now. You still there?
Yep.
Okay.
I am.
Cool. As it turns out, I just gave background into the story of Anne Frank, and we just got to, and I guess I'll redo it so you can hear where I am. And obviously you have the docket, but it's interesting to me in this. We're again just starting it. The section is what makes a criminal. I think that's my first subsection under the feature story, if I remember right on the docket.
Okay.
Again, Merriam-Webster defines crime as activity that is against the law, and law is defined as a set of rules made by the government, and that would mean that a criminal is someone who breaks government rules, right? So it doesn't mean, the way I'd use crime, they didn't actually commit necessarily real crime. They call you a criminal if you broke the government's rules, and I think that's very important because we're going to get to the Anne Frank thing here, and I think hopefully it's going to cause some people to be in a bit of a quandary. That's the aim of the show. We want to make you think. The law as a whole is an ever-expanding collection of rules that politicians, or lawmakers again, decree and occasionally repeal. Laws are as moral as the politicians who make them. That's from this article. I don't know if that's actually even true or not. But, right, the point is that the laws are ever-changing in sense. Right? So what the law is today might not be the law tomorrow. The law is different in one state in some circumstances than other states. The law is different in one country versus another country. Right? So it's a constantly changing thing. So what you do in one time and or place may be, perfectly lawful. And then what you do, if you do that same thing in a different time and or different place, you may be labeled as a criminal and, be subject to some kind of penalty, right? They put you in a steel box or something, or take some of your property away, usually in the form of cash. So I guess it always freaks me out that how comfortable people are with that. And usually if they do suggest a remedy, the remedy that they suggest is, well, let's just make all the laws the same everywhere, and then that little problem goes away. And again, I would argue, well, the only real laws, when I say it's very confusing for a listener, I can understand, because the rules that the government makes are called laws, and I think the only true laws are the laws of nature, right? The laws of justice. So those two words, I think I wrote somewhere that the difference between law in quotes and law, and I know that freaks people out, but I guess that's the way I try to explain it here. But so he says laws are as moral as politicians make them. I don't know. Maybe the law is actually less moral, or maybe it's more moral. Because it's this giant, argument, negotiation, compromise. I don't know all the words that you can throw in there. But I would argue, I agree with the author of the article. Simply put, laws are the rules politicians make up, and criminals are people who break them. Right? I think to me that was self-explanatory, and I'm going to throw it to you here in a second, Brad, but I just want to get through a couple of these things. So the author of the article says, it floored me to realize Anne Frank was in fact a criminal. She was a fugitive of the law. I hope that presents a moral quandary, and a lot of people maybe, did you read this book? Was it in high school or even junior high, Brad? Or did you have exposure to the story?
No, I did. I was just thinking about that. I think it was in like ninth grade or something.
Okay. And what light, I don't know if I should say portrayed, or was it received by you? I mean, what's your impression of it, or what do you think, Anne Frank? Did you do you go, yeah, she was a fugitive on the run, and she should have been incarcerated, or she should have been captured by the Nazis, or was it the opposite?
It was quite the opposite, that she was this very historical, courageous.
Oh. Your audio cut out there for a second, Brad. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
So it was the opposite of that she was this courageous figure.
Yes, and I would argue that was my same experience. And again, I don't remember exactly what grade, but ninth grade sounds about right. And I think, maybe we have that same impression. Maybe that's the way it was portrayed to us. Maybe that's just our impression of the facts at that time. But I'm guessing, obviously, since that was mine and your, impression, I think I'm guessing that was the majority view. People see Anne Frank as heroic, right? But again, according to these definitions, she was a criminal. So, and I alluded to earlier, again, what happened to her, but I'll get the author of this article is going to get there again. So I'm going to move on to just keep this moving along. We can express outrage at the designation of Anne Frank being a criminal, right? Since what did she do wrong? I would argue nothing, right? And again, why would I say nothing? Because for me, ultimately, I would say she violated no one's property right. So she couldn't possibly be guilty of a true crime. I understand by these definitions she would be a criminal, but I would argue it's not possible. It's an immoral law. Anyway, she says, the authors, not she, he, says we can debate which rules of any particular regime are tolerable or repugnant, right? But our opinions don't change the fact that criminal is a government-defined standard imposed on us, the governed, right? Think about this. In the case of Anne Frank, a law-abiding citizen was obligated to turn Anne into the police. To assist her was a crime. You think, well, okay, it was just an oddball case because it was the Nazis, and that was just, a very unique experience. In America, by the way, the Fugitive Slave Act obligated law-abiding citizens to turn in runaway slaves, and assisting them was punishable by 6 months in jail and a $28,000 fine in today's dollars. Right? Okay, now I'm going to go a little crazy places here because people say, well, hey, dude, those things have all been corrected. These are not problems. In early colonial America, masturbation, blasphemy, and homosexuality were crimes punishable by what? Death. Virtually any act you can think of has been criminalized by one regime or another. Again, alluding to my whole deal that legality is different in different times and places. Being a law-abiding citizen only means that you comply with whatever rules politicians have imposed on you. Throughout history, we observe only a slight overlap between the endless supply of laws governments impose on people and the handful of acts we all agree are morally wrong. And now, he said, that's his words, all agree. I'm sure not all agree. I think maybe a majority. I can't speak for other people. I don't know. But it seems to me that there's a fair amount of people, right, that agree that theft, assault, rape, murder, those things are actually crimes. And again, I would argue, why? Why are they crimes? Why would I call them a crime and not and turning in Anne Frank being a crime? I deny that it is in fact a crime. Why? Because these theft, assault, rape, murder are violations of people's property rights. Right? You're under no obligation to turn Anne Frank in because she didn't violate anyone's property rights. So am I leaving gaps there, Brad? Is there something that I should have filled in there?
No, but I think that there's the first point of discomfort that people might be feeling is you're insinuating or alluding to the parallels that during these extreme times that you talked about,
yep,
the Nazis, slavery,
yep,
that the government which was viewed as pretty evil at the time, that such acts of today, where the government may or may not be viewed as evilly, are really viewed as the same, the criminal acts.
Yes, to me, the point of, I agree with you. A lot of people say, well, those were outrageously evil acts or times, and they've been since corrected. So what are you talking about? The government it's way better now than it was then. And again, if that's a continuum problem, I can't really argue with you. Sure, for sake of argument, it's better now. But that's not necessarily the measure. Just because it's better doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to work to improve the situation. Right? And I'm going to try to point out that some things that are happening today eventually, and I don't know if that's going to be in part 1, part 2, part 3, or wherever we break this here tonight, is we're going to point some of that out. Right? That some of the things that are the law either requires or requires someone to do is in fact immoral. I think a lot of people would say, yeah, that's actually immoral. But they also claim it's moral to support the state. Well, how is it moral to support a government that's doing something immoral? That's the central question today. And if that's the case for you, what's your plan of action? What do you do? What are your possibilities? And again, I alluded to this earlier in the opening of the show that I think maybe I didn't. I can't remember where I put this. It's time. That would mean civil disobedience. And now don't freak out, everybody, when I use those words. I mean peaceful resistance. And we can explain that probably on another show. But again, I support nothing here but what's peaceful. So don't get the wrong idea. I know a lot of people like to jump off that plank there and go, oh, you're telling me since I've been aggressed again. No, I'm saying what we need to do. Really, the first thing that needs to be overcome is the education. It needs to come through your head, and I actually believe that's the only way real change can ever happen. But again, that's 10 more shows down the line. So the author now goes along to mention the American crime complex. To understand why we're criminals requires a basic overview of how law is created and enforced. Every law hatches, again, this is from the article, this is not me. Every law hatches a new crime with an associated punishment. Think about that. Every law hatches a new crime with a new associated punishment. A law is both an order and a threat. For if a law carries no threat of punishment, it's not a law, it's a suggestion, right? Politicians mince words by using different labels for the rules. Think about it. Laws, regulations, statutes, bills, acts, ordinances, etc., etc. But they all fundamentally mean the same thing. Obey or be punished. And I know a lot of people think this is what creates order in our society. Again, that's just another show. I'd argue it creates disorder. And again, other shows to explain that. Every year, American politicians create, think about this, thousands of new laws. They are incorporated into volumes consisting of hundreds of thousands of pages of legalese. These laws are grouped into codes such as CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, USC, IRS code, and codes for every state. These codes, along with the Constitution, executive orders, ratified treaties, county and city ordinances, and rulings from district courts to the Supreme Court, comprise U.S. law as a whole. But think of that. Volumes consisting of hundreds of thousands of pages written in legalese, right? You can't even understand them. Although the law is incomprehensible to the governed, ignorance of the law is not a defense when you're prosecuted by the government. And again, most people don't have an objection to this. Again, that freaks me out. Because I don't understand how that doesn't freak people out. It's been so traditional now for any time you have any kind of legal, occurrence, action, you hire an attorney. Why? Because you already know you can't understand the technicalities of law. And a lot of people cringe when a criminal, quote unquote, gets off on a technicality. Well, when we support this action, of this legalese and these thousands of pages of this stuff that nobody can understand, even the people who support the laws, right? They vote for them, our representatives, our senators. What was it, if I remember right? Oh, gosh, I can't think of the chick's name from California. Not Boxer, not Feinstein, the other girl. Who was the Speaker of the House. I can't think of her. Nancy Pelosi.
Pelosi, yeah.
She said we have to pass the bill to know what's in the bill, right? They don't even know what's in there. But few people raise an eyebrow at this. They just say, Tom, you don't understand. The world is very complex now. It's not simple like it used to be. And I would argue, of course, justice as its basis is very simple. And every person, that's partly why I'm doing the show, every person should know what that is. I think people don't pay attention to what's going on. They don't pay attention to the basics. And that's why they can't apply them. Anyway, So again, ignorance of the law is not a defense, even though all this crap is written in legalese and our legislators don't even know what's in there. Suspicion of committing even the most trivial crime subjects you to arrest at the discretion of a law enforcement officer. And that's important. Discretion. Are you serious? That's acceptable. The Supreme Court has ruled that it's legal to arrest people for crimes such as driving without a seatbelt. It's illegal to arrest people for crimes such as driving without a seatbelt or having unpaid parking tickets. Arrest can result in imprisonment for months or years without ever being convicted of a crime. And again, I guess people aren't squeamish about this because, well, it hasn't happened to me, so I don't really care. I can't imagine all the excuses that people can come up with. But again, excuse me, I hope is maybe a better description that more people are becoming aware that something's not right. Something's a little fishy in Denmark. Denmark, that's kind of close to where Anne Frank was, Belgium. Anywhere in America, the punishments for not obeying politicians' rules may include monetary fines, property confiscation, imprisonment, including de facto rape and torture, and execution. The application of these punishments is wildly inconsistent and often horrifically arbitrary. The minimum sentence for first-degree murder in Illinois is 20 years. The minimum. But if you do it in the next state over, Brad's home state of Indiana, it's 45 years. Compare 20 years of murder, Illinois, right, that would be, with 15 years for having sex on a beach. Or 5 years for stabbing a man to death. Or 5 days, yes, days, for raping a 14-year-old girl. Victimless crimes often carry far harsher sentences than raping and killing people, such as 25 years for selling painkillers to a friend. Last week we talked about the Dennis Hastert deal, right? And that, the bottom line is he was withdrawing larger sums from his bank account. That was kind of the red flag. The IRS, the FBI, I don't know all the agencies that all came in there. I can't recall them all. Go check it out on, do a Google search online. You can find it all. But bottom line for that, he's really being pursued for lying to the state, right? When the underlying crime is what? It's been alleged that he sexually abused at least 2 young boys while he was a wrestling coach at a high school in Illinois before he was Speaker of the House, and he'd been paying off in the range of $3.4 million to keep them quiet. By the way, one thing I didn't mention last week that I do think is very interesting, in a free society, it would not, of course, be illegal to be, blackmailed. It's just an agreement. Hey, here's the deal. I won't come forward and say that I was sexually abused by you if you hand me $3.4 million. The really cool thing is if it's legal, if word gets out, right, I assume there'd be some kind of written contract, and you got to breach a contract. You get Denny Hastert could get his $3.4 million back. But again, he's not even being pursued for the underlying real crime. In today's world, the real crime is lying to the state, a violating of the state's rules. There's a serious problem. But apparently violating these 2 young boys when they were in high school, that's not such a big deal. And I know you argue, well, the statute of limitations passed. Honestly, I don't know what the statute of limitations is. But geez Louise, shouldn't that be the concern? Right? And I haven't heard any word about it. Even if they say it should be out, hey, the deal is we really want to get this guy for what he did to these 2 young boys, but the statute of limitations has passed. We just simply can't do anything given our system of rules that we have in place, right? But I don't hear that big charade. I just hear, man, the FBI and the IRS are going to go after him for his structuring, as Tim explained it last week. Anyway, I know I'm off on last week a little bit. It was interesting, and I just wanted to add that. Back to the story. Again, I'm quoting from the article. It says, the Supreme Court ruled in 1978 that it's legal for prosecutors to threaten you with catastrophic punishment, even life imprisonment for a minor crime if you don't forfeit your right to a jury trial. In the landmark case, prosecutors secured a life sentence. Listen to this, a life sentence for forging an $88 check because the defendant refused a plea bargain. I don't know if it's in this or where I read it somewhere. Nope, he's going to mention this here in the next thing. Because prosecutors wield such enormous power, Almost everyone takes a plea bargain. Getting your day in court is the myth perpetuated in TV shows and movies. Innocent people often agree to plead guilty and suffer the punishment rather than risk having their lives destroyed. The system is rigged against you, and your chance of conviction at trial is around 90%. That's just, to me, that's astonishing. And, you know, there's a video later in this about a guy who trains people how to do jury selection. It's like, hey, you don't want people who can think. You don't want people who can question all this. You just want people who are willing to convict. I'm like, hey, it's all about, for the prosecutors, it's all about conviction rate. Anyway, back to the story. Let's get back to the secret annex of Anne Frank. The Frank family moved from Germany to Amsterdam in 1933. We already mentioned that. Otto started a successful spice and pectin business. I don't even know what pectin is. Do you know what pectin is?
Pectin is the, what is it? It's a thickener, natural sugar thickener, I think, in certain foods.
See, I learned something. I like to learn something.
Apples have a lot of pectin.
Okay. In 1942, the family went into hiding from the Nazis in the rear section of Otto's building and called it the Secret Annex. It's a cramped, makeshift living quarters whose hidden entry is masked by a swinging bookcase. It's like the old, what was that, Young Frankenstein movie. Put the handle back. You don't remember that, do you? You didn't watch? That's an awesome movie, Brad.
It is spectacular. One of my favorites.
Yeah. Put the candle back when he gets when he gets his head crunched in the bookcase. Anyway. The feeling was overwhelming as again, I'm quoting from the article. The feeling was overwhelming as I slunk through the space. I am disgusted by my species. This little girl and her family spent 2 years living with a noose around their necks, knowing the floor could drop out at any time. All right, I'm going to do an aside here again. Because the author alluded to a noose around their necks, right? They were in fear constantly for this 2 years. And I know people say, well, you're talking about this stuff that happened 50, 60, 70 years ago, whatever it exactly was. Who cares? It's over with. It's been fixed. What about people living in Iraq, Syria? I don't even know all the places, right? That Middle East, Northern Africa. There's probably other places. There have been, what do they call them now? They don't call them casualties. They call them... the word escapes me. They always come up with words other than saying, hey, we killed some innocent people.
Collateral damage?
Collateral damage. They come up, right? They come up with all this mumbo-jumbo stuff other than saying, hey, innocent people were killed. Oops. Right? If you know that a drone strike, and we're going to do a show about drones, it's a very interesting thing, and from a legal perspective. Marjorie Cohen is, I would argue, one of the foremost minds on this. We're going to check that out. But think about this. Drones over your head. Is that not a noose around your neck? Knowing that any instant you could be wiped out. And you say, well, if you're not guilty of anything, you're not going to be wiped out. Well, we already know innocent people have, in fact, been killed by drone strikes. So don't tell me that innocent people, if you didn't do anything wrong, you have nothing to fear. Right? They certainly have something to fear. And you say, well, they got bigger fears. And maybe they do. I don't know. I don't know anybody personally over there. But that doesn't make this fact escape, right? That this is literally over your head. At any moment, your life could be ended. Think about what that does to your head. And again, that's the parallel that he's drawing here to Anne Frank. Well, he's not drawing that parallel. I am, the author. And then check this out. So the Anne Frank and her family lived with essentially this noose around their necks, knowing the floor could drop out at any time. Then one day it in fact did. An informant tipped off the police. They were arrested and sent to death camps, which were described, by the way, as labor camps to its victims. Work will set you free, it said above the gate at Auschwitz. The Franks were, fortunately, I guess, healthy enough to be put to work rather than gassed straight away. And this is where he humanizes this a little bit, the author of this article. He says, are you female? Imagine yourself as a 15-year-old being stripped naked by guards, having your head shaved, getting tattooed with a serial number, and then being forced into nonstop hard labor. Take a moment and imagine having a daughter who suffered this fate. Right? He's trying to personalize this. And I do think that's a good thing, because most people see the stuff that we talk about on the show as philosophical, it's policy, it's all this stuff. But it doesn't really matter to me because it hasn't happened to me. But if you have a 15-year-old daughter or had a 15-year-old daughter, if your daughter's older now, think about that for a moment. You'd be okay with that, right? Because it was the law. And again, people are going to excuse this because they say, well, it's already been straightened away. But you're telling me this stuff doesn't happen anymore? I have a hard time understanding that. If not in the U.S., somewhere in the world. And when I say somewhere, probably in numerous places. The author goes on to say, we're members of a species that actually does this. Not as an act of spontaneous insanity, right? It wasn't like some dude went whack and that was it. But deliberately and methodically. Let us remind you, or remember, it was legal. So when people tell me, well, that's the law, Tom, think about what the law has done throughout history. So here we get to maybe I don't know if this is actually the sad conclusion or part of the conclusion of the Frank's story. Only Ann's father, Otto, actually survived. His wife and 2 daughters perished despite the substantial measures he had taken to avoid this horrific fate. They left Germany early on and even put his business in a gentile's name to stay out of government filings. As things got worse, he applied for visas to bring his family to America or Cuba, but they were rejected. How did this family end up trapped in Amsterdam? Laws. They were trapped by laws. Again, I assume most people really don't have a problem with this so far, and again, that freaks me out. And again, I think there's really nothing new here. We just keep pounding away at the same thing, but think of what is happening. All right, so again, I don't know how to pronounce this woman's name. I think it's Meep, but I could be wrong. A heroic woman named Meep Gies, is it Gies? I don't know, rescued Anne's diary before the police confiscated everything in the annex, which again was the secret back room or rooms. Meep returned the diary to Otto, the father, right? After the war ended, she was one of 6 souls who risked their lives as outlaws, right? They were outlaws. Hey, remember Robin Hood? Robin of the Hood, he was an outlaw. In order to keep them in hiding, Meep not only rescued Anne's diary, she never read it out of respect for Anne's privacy. When Otto published it, Meep said she'd read it. If she'd read it, she would have felt obligated to destroy it since it was filled with damning information, including her name and all the others who helped the family survive, including an illegal underground supply network. Now again, back in those times, the times of slavery, you would be, by law, be required to turn in anyone who helped that family, or in the case of the slave trade, anyone who helped the slave, right? By law, you would have that obligation to turn them in, or anybody who supplied the underground network. The dramatic irony of Meep not only reading Anne's diary made me cry. This again, the author. Here's an act of human decency which epitomizes everything government is not. Meep not only risked everything trying to keep these people alive, she not only saved Anne's diary, one of the world's most powerful pieces of literature, she not only didn't read it despite its owner getting shipped off to a death camp. After the Franks were arrested, Meep went to the police station and offered the arresting officer, check this out, offered the arresting officer a bribe for their release. As fearless as that was, it didn't work. She escaped punishment herself, by the way, because the officer had a soft spot for her being from his hometown of Vienna. If it's possible to love a dead woman you've never laid eyes on, I do. Again, this is from the author. Meep, thank you for showing people that human decency springs from following our conscience, not the law. Millions blindly follow orders. The bravest heroes in this world are lawbreakers. And eventually here we're going to get to Snowden, right? Think of that notion of lawbreakers. But most people tell me that the census, and then we're going to wrap this up for the night. We're going to make this a short story tonight, because I know actually, isn't the finals on tonight, the NBA finals, Brad?
It might be.
I think it is, and I think probably a lot of people want to get to that. So we're gonna cut it short. We'll have a little bit here, and we're gonna let it go. So if you want in the docket, switch down to the closeout, and but I'm gonna get there in a second. So check this out. Most people tell me the sense is you're making a stink about nothing. So let's just leave that in this context here before we quit for the day. A single piece of data is what this section is called by the author. Walking from Ann's secret annex into CNN's nothing to hide mass surveillance chorus provided a rare moment of clarity in my life. The author's alluding to during this time when Snowden was grabbed. CNN was all thither, is he a traitor? Is Snowden a traitor? Is he not? Blah, blah, blah. And the whole mass surveillance thing is, hey, if you got nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, right? That basic idea. That's what he's alluding to here. He says her father's disclosure a decade earlier of a single piece of data, he's speaking about Anne Frank, their religion, destroyed his family. The disclosure was a legal requirement to be issued a passport. Again, think of the census in the U.S. To apologists of mass surveillance, what did Anne Frank have to hide? I ask because the person credited with popularizing the nothing to hide argument is none other than Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Public Enlightenment, they called it, and propaganda for the Third Reich. Back then, the word propaganda didn't have a negative connotation like it does now. It meant public relations. So the last thing before we go basically wrap up, I want to say, after examining the Frank family passports in the secret annex, it later struck me how much more information is extracted by the U.S. Census and Annual American Community Survey. Where were you born? Are you black, African American, or Negro? Are you Pakistani, Latino? Are you employed? What is your profession? How much money do you make? Do you own or rent? How much do you spend on utilities? Who lives with you? Do you have children? How well do you speak English? Do you speak another language at home? What is your marriage status? Have you been divorced? Where did you go to school? Have you been employed by the U.S. military? Which wars did you fight in? And on it goes. And I think even one of them is like how many bathrooms you have. I think I've seen that, right? All information explained away as needed to hand out government benefits. And again, put that, please, in context of what the Frank family did years before they had to hide, right, in this annex, as they so called it. It seems so innocent. Everybody's, well, it's not a big deal. Well, it was the distinguishing factor that really put the Franks, their lives in jeopardy, right? And again, when that's not happening, I know people will sit here and say, but Tom, you don't understand. That can't happen here. Well, tell that to the Japanese who were interned in World War II, right? Tell that to these people that are victims of, and again, it's not the exact same, of course not, but of civil forfeiture laws. There's just another one where a woman, I believe it was in Michigan, the article just came, I saw it today, that a case where she was authorized, again, I believe it was the state of Michigan, by the state of Michigan to use medical marijuana. Wait, beyond that, she was authorized by the law, according to her, to administer medical marijuana to like 5 other patients that were in her care, right? She got raided. They took everything, including her vibrator, by the way, and she hasn't gotten any of it back. I can't remember how long it's been, but it's been quite a while. She's been in court numerous times, and the prosecutor said to her directly to her face, not only do I not have to give it back to you, I'm not giving anything back to you. And yes, you say, well, that's a much lesser crime. I'm not arguing that it's not, but I'm still arguing, why is this allowed to go on? And when people say I'm nitpicking, that things are just fine now, case in point, right? Number of things. This article goes on and on and on, and we're going to do that again in part 2. We're going to set up, but I just want to go down. But think about this. Resistance to the law is not necessarily criminal. I'm using my definition of criminal, right? When you violate someone's property rights. Again, today's definition of criminal is whenever you break the government's rules or laws, right? But I'm saying the resistance to that law is not necessarily criminal in the true sense, I would argue. We advocate anything peaceful on this show. When I advocate civil disobedience, I do so with no violent intent. To do so would, of course, violate the libertarian legal theory that I started the show with regarding the initiation of force. You know, I argue, not only do we never support the initiation of violence, right, we denounce it, right? This show, in our view, is to promote a peaceful, prosperous world, right? right? And again, I'm arguing on the number of cases where people say that the state is what creates order in society. I'm arguing the opposite is the case. And again, in history, I'm looking at some of these laws to illustrate that fact. So with that, I don't know if you're ready, Brad, if you want to close us out for tonight's show, and we'll resume next time with part 2.
So to repeat the closing quote from last week, arguing that you don't care about the right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. And that's from Edward Snowden. So think about that, folks. Please tell your friends. As Tom always likes to say, even tell your enemies about our show. We'd be glad for you to do that. We'd appreciate it. Next week's episode will be a continuation of the discussion, You're a Criminal in a Mass Surveillance World, How to Not Get Caught by David Montgomery. The show will be live next Tuesday, June 9th at 7 p.m. Central Time.
Wait, I got the wrong date. That'll be the 16th. Today's the 9th.
Today's the 9th.
So
You're
that's
right.
Tuesday, June 16th. Sorry.
Yep. We hope that we have provoked you to think. Make your comments on Facebook, our Facebook page, and the article that we discussed tonight is posted. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to you joining us in our next discussion. Until next time, this has been the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. Thanks for everyone for joining us. And again, like Brad said, till next time, this has been the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. Good night, everyone. Good night, folks.